Welcome to the Vancouver Public Library for this special event to discuss the best-selling book, The Heart of a Superfan, a memoir of grit, love, family, and basketball. I'm Jeremy Allingham. Thank you for the introduction, Jorge. This book is all about a Canadian success story. This is the story of Nav Bhatia. Nav came from India to Canada to build a better life for himself and his family.
Hey Vancouver, I'm sorry I am not able to join you on this event, but I hope everybody gets a copy of my book there. This is my real story. The stories inside, some of them I have never told anybody, so I hope you read them and enjoy them, and I'm sure you are going to relate to them and enjoy it. And Tamara is going to be there, and Tamara has done a fantastic job. I love her, the way she has helped me to come up with this book. So enjoy the evening. Thank you.
So how did this happen? How did you come to co-author the memoir of the most famous Canadian basketball fan?
That is such a good question. Okay, I'm going to explain that with a little bit of a story. So the Raptors won the championship in 2019, and my husband, who's in the crowd here, is a huge basketball fan. I, however, as you mentioned, don't care about basketball. Still don't care about basketball. But for some reason, it must be because it was in the news, I was very aware of that special game that was happening, the one that ended up being the buzzer beater game that everybody knows about. So I knew that this game was coming up and what an important moment it was for the Raptors, just because it was an important moment in Canadian news. So I was like, Jacob, shouldn't we just watch this game and see what happens? And of course they won, and I was like, wow, this is a really exciting game. Didn't watch any games after that. And then for some reason, the game that they actually won the championship, I just randomly said to him again, shouldn't we just watch this on the TV? And then they won. So I've told Nav, and he kind of agrees with me, that I'm the Raptors' lucky mascot and the reason they won the championship. So I mean, basically, not a basketball fan, as you said. And I was very surprised when Nav's team approached me to potentially work on the project with them. They had actually reached out to a bunch of sports writers because they knew that they wanted to get his story out there. And they tried to work with sports writers, but Nav's story is not really about being an athlete. So the sports writers were writing in a way that was more about the game and less about his story. And so then they tried a different tactic where they reached out to try and find South Asian writers in Canada, of which, unfortunately, there just aren't that many. There aren't actually that many racialized authors in Canada in general who kind of do co-author ghostwriting work. So they really had to cast the net wide. And that's how they reached me. And they asked me to write like a 4,000-word sample essay based on the CBC documentary on Nav's life. And I think it flowed out. It was took me maybe 2 hours to write it. And I sent it off. And I didn't hear from them for a month. And then the next time I heard from them, they were like, great, we want to sign you. So that's pretty much it. That's how it happened.
How surprised were you when you got that email?
The email
or the call?
The email that I got it? Or the
that they wanted you to do it.
Not surprised.
Okay.
I mean, you know me, I'm a pretty confident person. So I was like, yeah, I can do this. And it felt right. When I was writing it, it just felt right. You know when you get that gut feeling that you know something is the right fit for you? That's what it felt like working on Nav's project. So I wasn't surprised.
So Nav and basketball aside, I mean, the idea of writing someone's memoir or life story, that's just kind of a wild thought to begin with. You're hired to write the story of a complete stranger. I mean, you know him a little bit through his fame. But what's going through your head when you're heading into that process to meet this person, to know their story, to tell their story? How did you approach it?
That's a great question. I think I was mostly really nervous that he was going to be a diva and a celebrity because he's so larger than life. And I think my biggest concern was, can I get him to be real with me? And I was thinking of all of these things to ask him to get him to open up. I think I was just very nervous about it because I'd actually never even met him before I signed the contract. And the first day that I met him was way past that.
Well, tell me about that. I mean, that's got to be a big moment of this whole thing. You have an idea of someone, you've seen them on TV, you've written a little bit of a passage about them. Now it's rubber hits the road. What's this guy like? What's the meeting going to be like? How did that go?
It was such a like Vancouver versus Toronto thing, because I work and like I was working at downtown at CBC right here, and I was meeting him at the Cactus Club, and I biked over there.
It's totally your spot, hey, the Cactus Club.
Yeah, like I love that. He had just, of course, because Nav being who he is, had just flown in on a helicopter and landed at the heliport in downtown Vancouver, and then was heading off to Victoria for a Canada basketball event. So he's like, I have like 2 hours to meet you in between these flights. Can you come and meet me? So I biked over and I walked in with my pannier, my bike bag, and he looked at it and he was like, what is that? And I was like, it's a pannier, it's a bike bag. And he was like, what is that? And like, you put it on your bike and then you have your stuff with you. And so I'll keep my laptop. And he just like looked at me and he was like, people bike? And his manager who was there was like, no, it's a Vancouver thing. Like, don't worry about it. So we definitely were not, we don't come from the same kind of like worldview. We have very different approaches to things. And it was going to be an interesting meeting, I think, from that point on.
And how did it evolve from there? Like, obviously you had to meet multiple times. Like, was there an evolution of building that understanding from what sounds like almost zero at start?
The first thing I actually said to Nav when I met him was like, I told him straight up, and I think he appreciates my honesty, because I said to him, I had no idea who you were. I mean, I had a vague idea because I grew up in Toronto. So you would see Nav's face on billboards because he's a car salesman. So you would see his billboards when you would drive by on the 401, and it was always for Hyundai and things like that. So I was vaguely aware of who Nav Bhatia was, but because I wasn't a basketball fan, I didn't really know him. I knew him more because of his daughter, Tia Bhatia. And the reason for that was she had put out some videos talking on her social media accounts, talking about how she was adopted by this family, this Indo-Canadian family. And I remember thinking to myself when I saw that, how cool. Because in India, it's, boys are preferred in terms of children. And so here was this family that was adopting a girl. And I thought, wow, that is an incredible story. So I actually told Nav, I know about what you're doing for girls' rights and women's rights in India and in Canada. And that's the story that I want to tell. And he just went, perfect. That's the story I want to tell too. He's like, I don't really want to talk about basketball. Of course, we have to talk about basketball because I'm the super fan. But he's like, I want this story to be so much more about immigration, about women's rights, about the things that we can do to bring change into the world. And so we were on the same page, even though we came from very different points of view.
So that sounds like a pretty key moment of trust building as far as your relationship then.
Yeah.
Did you have any preconceived notions heading in that were either confirmed or dispelled in getting to know him?
That he was a diva, and he really isn't. I was so prepared to have to manage a celebrity, and I was very pleasantly surprised to see how genuine he was. Like at that first meeting, he was like, can I drive you back? And I was like, how are you going to take my bike back? Like, please explain that to me in the taxi cab or whatever. Also, he's like 200 pounds. He could not have walked me back to CBC very easily. Like, I don't know how he did the parade because he was tired after that. But yeah, he was just so genuine that it really surprised me. He invited me to his home. I spent a whole week with him. I spent a whole week with his family, ate food, like dinner with them. Like, he's just a really nice guy. And I was not expecting that at all. Interesting.
So, okay, I'm glad he's a nice guy, but the one thing that's undeniable is he's got this like ebullient, relentless energy. I knew that the first time I saw him courtside at a Raptors game. What's that like? What's that like in person, trying to get this guy to sit down with you, answer questions, get down to business? Like, is it just overwhelming, or how does that work?
Okay, so those of you who know me know that I have pretty relentless energy as well. Like I can go, like I'm an Energizer bunny, nothing will stop me. And he managed to exhaust me, which I think is incredible. At one point we were, when I was in Toronto interviewing him, I think we started our day at 8 a.m. And he dropped me back off at my hotel at 10 p.m. And then at midnight, I was still like transcribing the notes from the interviews that I had done. And he calls me up at 1 a.m. saying, oh, I have this thing that I want you to do. And I was just like, no, please go to bed so that I can go to bed. Like, it was just tiring. So it really surprises me that at 72 years old, he has so much energy that he can kick my butt. I think that's impressive.
That is wild. So now, who aside from Nav did you speak to in order to be able to write the book?
The key people who I spoke to are, I think, like he describes that behind his success is his wife Arvinder, his daughter Tia, and his manager Rinku. So those were the three people who I spent the most time with, because I think they are the ones who get a real genuine sense of who Nav is when he's not Nav the Superfan. So I really wanted to capture Nav the person, not Nav the Superfan. And so those people were really important. And then aside from that, I spoke to some of his basketball buddies who I'm not really allowed to talk about that, but there were quite a few folks who I spoke to as well. And that was very cool to get to meet them.
I'm gonna have to find out after about who those people are. So this is an interesting aspect of co-authoring a memoir is you write about some very emotional moments from Nav's life. The story that came through most viscerally for me was the story of adopting his daughter, speaking with her and holding her for the first time. What's it like to hear that story in an intimate way and then have to take it and put it in their words out to the world?
Such a good question. So Nav is somebody who finds it really hard to open up. Because he's used to being in the media, he's very good at delivering those 1-minute clips that you need on CBC News. Like he knows how to hit that mark and move on. So one of the hardest challenges in writing this book was getting him to slow down and to savor the details, to give me what he was really feeling. And the one exception to that was when he was talking about his daughter and adopting her. That's when the real Nav came out. I felt like that was when we sort of like broke the ice in a very special way, because his genuine love for his daughter is so visceral. It was the only time where I didn't have to ask his family members around him, so what was he wearing? What were you wearing? What was the walls and the color of, like the paint color, things like that, because he remembered everything in such detail. But generally I would say that, in terms of getting him to open up, that was a challenge. And I think for me, it was trying to take what he was saying, because his emotions are what comes through. Nav's memory as a 72-year-old is not that clear. So what I had to do was to trust the emotion and fill in the gaps with details by actually going to the places that he was talking about and observing for myself or looking up archives of what that would have looked like and try to build it from there.
Would you push him though? Would you try to drag that stuff out of him, or would you kind of hammer him on details? Would that work?
Sometimes it would work. It was, childhood memories were lots visceral for him. The more recent stuff, like if I would ask him what happened at the championship parade, he couldn't really tell me. It was like a blur, even though it was so recent. And I think the adrenaline was such that I don't think he processed as much. But his childhood memories in particular, and food, he loves food. If you ask him to describe Rajma Chawal, Chole Bhature, where he got the best aloo tikkis, he's got that down pat. So food is clearly an obsession for him, but childhood memories were the most strong.
Okay, so a section of the book that I found sincerely stunning and even a little bit hard to comprehend, but I think it says a lot about Nav, is in 2019, during the Eastern Conference Finals between the Toronto Raptors and the Milwaukee Bucks, Nav is the subject of a quite nasty racist tweet. And rightly so, the racist tweet causes quite an uproar in the Twitter sphere and beyond Raptors fans. But what follows is quite incredible. Tell us about it.
Okay, so Nav was, the Bucks were losing and during that game, and one of the Bucks fans tweeted out, who's that guy with the diaper on his head? They called his turban, because he's a turbaned Sikh, they called him a diaper head, which was obviously very offensive. But for Nav, who has been in Canada and he arrived here in 1984, math, yes, 84. For him, this was not something that he was unused to. He's actually quite used to dealing with racism for the majority of the time that he's been here. So for him, it was like water off a duck's back. He just ignored it and continued moving on. And there was such an uproar, as you said, that he realized that guy was being flamed on social media in a way that was crossing the line in his point of view. So he wanted to just reach out to him and ask him if he's okay and, if there's anything that he can do to help out, because that's who Nav is.
That's an incredible reflex.
It is. He is just genuinely nice and kind. And so he eventually ended up meeting that guy. The guy was very remorseful. He didn't even want to give Nav his real name or his phone number because he was so ashamed of what he had done. He just fired off that tweet in a moment of, Bucks frenzy, I suppose, for his team. And so Nav basically, was just there for him. And eventually he said, I don't want you to apologize. You've learned from this incident. And he's like, what I want you to do is the next time I come to town, I want us to meet for dinner. I want you to have a meal with me, and then we'll go watch a game together. And hopefully, I can change your mind about what it's like to be a Sikh or a brown man in North America. And I thought that was just so incredible that he did that he actually went and met this person, and now they are friends. Every time he goes to watch the Bucks play there, he meets up with this guy and his son, and they have a genuine friendship. It's actually astonishing to me, because as somebody who's had to deal with racism myself, or sexism, whichever way, my tendency is when somebody tries to put me down, I punch back harder so they know that they can never cross that line again. And that's sort of, I think something that Jeremy, the two of us, our generation would say this, is you got to stand up for yourself. And when I talked to Nav about that, he said to me something that really made me think. He said, when you clap back on someone, you're not changing their mind. And so he's like, I could retort in anger, but what I want to do is actually change their mind. I just don't want to make them feel small. There's a place and time for that. And I thought, okay, you're right. Of course you should stand up for yourself, but maybe there's a different way to actually bring genuine change in the world. And that's what he's trying to do. So I don't know if I can fully live that, but it's certainly something that I had to think about a lot.
It's chessboard thinking, right? He's fully macro looking at the situation, whereas I think people rightly usually get caught up in the moment. So there's a lot of great passages in the book, and I've asked you to pick a couple. I'd love it if you could share one with us now. Okay.
So the first one that I'm going to read for you is, it's called The Phone Call That Changed My Life. And this is set in 1999. Arvinder and I had been living in Canada for 15 years when we finally became Canadian citizens. It was exciting to take the oath and then swear allegiance to our new country. We both got dressed up for the ceremony. I wore a red and white turban. We were feeling settled. Business was going well at both of my dealerships. Kudrat was blossoming, and Arvinder was finally calling Toronto home after resisting it for so many years. For those of you who don't know, Kudrat is what he calls his daughter, Tia. He says life is good, and of course I had my Raptors. Not long after that, my cell phone broke before Raptors game, so I stopped at a store to get it fixed. Inside, a white guy in his 40s was on the courtesy phone. He looked up as I walked in and said, "Honey, I gotta go. My cab is here." That guy's words changed my life. A lot of Sikhs drive cabs in Toronto. I'm proud of them. I believe in the dignity of labor. But I was not a cabbie. I was a store as a customer, just like he was. I'd come to Canada hoping to avoid discrimination, and here it was happening all over again. I realized it didn't matter how much people like me as an individual or as a superfan, many still saw my community as a stereotype. Cab drivers, gas station attendants, truck drivers, or maybe even extremists. In the wake of that man's words, I got angry. For sure, most of the responsibility rests on the individual to be open-minded, inclusive, and respectful of other cultures. But if I wanted people to understand my community, then Sikhs like me needed to show up with pride and celebrate our rich, beautiful culture, not just within our own circles, but with others. I realized I needed to change tactics. Whatever time or resources or money was needed, I was fully committed. But what could I do? I thought about it and thought about it some more. I talked to some leaders at gurdwaras and within our community, but their ideas didn't seem big enough to make an impact. And then I had a light bulb moment. The Raptors had always treated me with grace and kindness. One time, while the Raptors were playing the Atlanta Hawks, the ball went out of bounds and accidentally smacked me in the face. My turban flew off my head and landed a few rows back. I was shocked. I felt like I was undressed. We Sikhs never leave our home without our turbans. I felt alone and ashamed as all eyes turned on me. But that moment was fleeting. An Atlanta player immediately ran up to check that I was okay. Then a spectator carefully retrieved my turban and handed it back to me. Eva, one of the ushers in the arena, who always stands a few rows behind me, saw the look on my face and quickly took off her jacket and covered my hair with it. Then I saw the head of security for the Raptors running up to me. He escorted me through the tunnel to a private bathroom in the executive lounge so I could wrap my turban up again properly. All these people made me feel safe, welcome, and wanted. To change perceptions of the Sikh community, I realized I should turn to my beloved Raps. My superfan cred gave me the confidence to approach the management team with the idea of hosting Vaisakhi Day at halftime. Nowadays, community events and heritage events are all the rage. But in 1999, this was an unusual idea. When I asked the management to send me 3,000 Sky Dome tickets so I could celebrate the Sikh New Year on center court, they looked confused and surprised. Would there be enough people to fill the seats, they asked? But the guy who oversees the ticket sales for MLSC seemed confident I could fill the seats. I'm pretty driven, and he knew that. The Raptors management and I started planning out the logistics about a month in advance. We talked about bringing Bhangra and Bollywood dancers. And then I had a brainwave. What if we brought an elephant out onto the court? Elephants are popular in India and are considered a symbol of good luck. You'll often see Hindu grooms arriving on them on the altar. Plus, they're such gentle animals. I could see the management team hesitate. An elephant inside the arena? Would the elephant even fit through the tunnel? What if it did its business on the court? I told them not to worry. I found a guy who rented elephants for Indian weddings in Mississauga, and he agreed to bring one to the Sky Dome. I was super excited. We dressed up my daughter in a navy blue lehenga and gold jewelry. Even Arvinder made one of her rare appearances at the basketball game. For the ceremonial tip-off, my daughter walked in front of the baby elephant, and then when the announcer explained the significance of Vaisakhi, she ran back to her seat and we had a big bag of popcorn waiting for her. Next, the elephant came up to where I was standing on center court. It raised its trunk and dropped a basketball right into my waiting hands as I tossed the ball for the tip-off. Sweepers followed right behind because the elephant, because they didn't want it to leave any scuff marks. It was the only time a baby elephant has crapped on the NBA court. Oh shit. The sweepers did not seem amused. With the game underway, the arena sounded livelier than usual to me. The Raptors and I filled the seats with kids from all over the city because I didn't want only Sikh children to experience this beautiful game. I wanted children of all backgrounds to integrate with one another and come together for their love of their sport. If you sit next to someone for a 48 game, you're sure to realize they're the same as you. We went to community centers and places of worship and asked for help for bringing kids from free to the Sky Dome. During halftime, Bhangra dancers danced their hearts out to the irresistible beat of the dhol. They wore their colorful pagaris and rumals with pride. Even I did some Bhangra with them. There were proud Sikhs wearing turbans and showing off their prowess in Gatka. It was a spectacular show. We've carried on that Vaisakhi Day tradition with the Raptors ever since. I'll pass the other thing. Rick came on to work with me with this special event. He's my manager. He made it modern by integrating hip hop and Bhangra into the show. And that was the first time we saw Drake stick around during halftime. The NBA and the Raptors loved the publicity that they got from Vaisakhi and then the subsequent Diwali nights I also helped to organize. Over the years, the city's population has dramatically changed and become more diverse. Walking down the streets of Toronto, you're more likely to hear many different languages being spoken, from Punjabi and Mandarin to Portuguese and Arabic to Italian and Farsi. Immigrants make up close to 50% of the city's population. these people weren't born as ice hockey fans. So there's a big opportunity for the Raptors to attract fans that aren't being served by that game.
Thank you for that. Now, let's talk a little bit about, we're surrounded by tens of thousands of books. It might seem like no big deal, but I'm here to tell you writing a book is a big deal. Tell me about the actual kind of blood, sweat, and tears of what goes into, like for you, the work of actually writing this book. Okay,
so in the publishing industry, books are usually like a labor of love and they take several years to happen. Nav, he operates at the speed of lightning, so I was told that I had to finish the book in a very fast timeline. Like we had about a year to get it done. So I was working, I am still working full-time at CBC, but at that point I was putting in my 40 hours at CBC, and I switched my schedule so that I was working on a compressed work week. So I was working 40 hours in 4 days, and then I had Mondays off to just work on the book. So Nav and I would meet for 2-3 hours every Monday afternoon, and we would have Zoom calls, which just felt like, lovely moments. And then I would go away and write up from those interviews everything that needed to be done. So I was probably putting in like 60-70 hour weeks to get this book done in time. And it was a challenge. Like I just had to be that disciplined to sit down and just write about 4,000 words a day. That was sort of the average that I was hitting. And let me tell you, that was not easy, to put it mildly.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
You failed to mention that you were also enrolled in a Masters of Fine Art writing program at King's College.
I graduated.
Hey, congratulations. I do wonder, what were your profs' reactions when you told them that your main project would be a future best-selling book?
Oh, I don't think we knew that.
Yeah, you knew.
Okay, we kind of knew that because it's Nav. That was a whirlwind because I joined that program in June 2022 and I signed the book deal in August 2022. So, it was very chaotic where I was coming in with a different project in mind and I had to switch. And I wasn't sure if I could do it. So I actually, some of my MFA colleagues are right here in the crowd. And I actually went up to one of them who's here, Jan, and I said, I think I need to defer the program. I don't think I can work full time, write this book, and do an MFA at the same time. And oh, by the way, I was also teaching at UBC at that time. So I was just like, I don't think I can do 4 jobs at the same time. And Jan, so lovely, she was like, you tell them you're changing a project and that this should be their project. And I was like, that's a brilliant idea. So I went up to the program director and I put my pitch out there. I said I'd work on this book for the first year of my program and then transition to another book during my second year. And they miraculously said yes. And it was such a gift to be able to have that because as a journalist, I'm used to writing in a 45-second news hit or 2 minutes max feels like a luxury. Perhaps a 700-word article is like, wow, you've been given so much room because normally it's like 400 words for a story. 600 would be the upper end. So to be told you have to write something that's 70,000 words was next to impossible for me to fathom how it would go. I'm so used to writing in tight, succinct sentences that every chapter I would write it in 1,000 words and go, great, I've done it. And then go, oh no, there's another 3,000 words to make it a chapter. And I realized those were just outlines I was writing for a book. So what was really great about having the MFA support at that time was given the, working with mentors and supervisors who really taught me how to write long, how to be more descriptive, how to think about the long game and not just, what do you need to hit right now as your headline and move on because no one else is going to read the rest. So it was actually just wonderful having their support.
That's great. And now something that you may talk a lot about in Masters of Fine Art writing program is voice. I can only imagine that was kind of the leaping off point for this whole project was landing and if not perfecting, understanding what you wanted that voice to be and how you wanted to put it to paper. How did you go about capturing Nav's voice in this book?
So I think there were two things that helped there. I work as the first person producer at CBC News. So basically my job is to help people who are in the public publish their personal essays. And so part of my daily work is always paying attention to the cadence and rhythms of other people's voices. And everybody talks in a different way, or they write in a different way, specifically in this case. Nav's voice is not the way he speaks, but the way he thinks and the way he writes is very short, descriptive sentences. They're clipped, they're short, and he emphasizes, everything is, his favorite word is awesome. Everything is awesome. So that was something I had to work around. But generally, there is a rhythm, the way that he speaks, that is very true to how North Indians in particular of his generation speak. It's different from the way that, second generation Canadian Indians or Indo-Canadians speak. And so I was really attuned to the fact that he sounded exactly like my grandparents. And he didn't sound quite like the way my parents spoke. He doesn't sound the way I speak, but he has the same rhythm that my grandparents speak in. And so that's what I was able to tap into and pull his voice out that way. And it actually felt really natural to do that. It was maybe the easiest voice for me to slip into because it's something that I was so familiar with already.
Well, let's get back to that voice and let's hear another excerpt from the book.
Okay. It's odd for me to have achieved this celebrity status because I believe I'm actually quite a private person. I love meeting people and forming connections with them, but I don't like going to parties or events, even though I sometimes have to support the Raptors or other philanthropic projects. When I attend an event, I take as many photos as fans want and then head straight to the food. If it's Indian, you'll find me at the Golgappa or Chaat station, of course, and then I race home to my wife and daughter. We're all home buddies. My wife and daughter are the only people in the world who I can be fully myself with. I don't have to keep up my superfan energy in front of them, and I can simply relax. My favorite time of day is when I get to sit in front of our living room with Arvinder and drink her specially brewed teas and dipping the jalebis into them to add some sweetness to that. And of course, watching NBA reruns. Anytime there isn't a game on, I like to take Arvinder out for a nice dinner or watch a movie with her. Kudar teases us that we're just still dating and asks us to stop being so embarrassingly cute together. But we can't help it. There's so much love in our marriage 40 years later. Arvinder also likes to enjoy me by trolling the Raptors. She'll sometimes sit next to me on our comfortable green leather sofa, her feet being massaged by the machine I've set up to help with her arthritis, and she'll say, "I think the Raptors are definitely going to lose this game." She tries to distract me or get a rise out of me. I enjoy our banter. We were watching one such game when she stood up in front of the TV and asked me what amount of money it would take for me to stop watching the Raptors play. She kept throwing out higher and higher amounts of money. And then, just as I was about to lose my cool, the power went out. I couldn't believe it. I got out my flashlight and decided to walk down to the street to see if any of the neighbors had power. And if so, could I watch the game on their TV? But the gate leading out of our driveway was electrical and it was firmly locked in place. It was at least 4 feet high, so I held the flashlight in my mouth and tried to jimmy the lock open. Arvinder's nephew, who was staying with us, drove up on the other side but couldn't get in either. There we were, trying to pry open the gate, when all of a sudden we heard a terrifying voice come over the megaphone. "Put your hands out and come out!" I nearly jumped out of my skin in fright and immediately threw my hands up in the air. It was the freaking police. With the streetlights out on this dark night, one of the neighbors had thought we were burglars and called the cops on us. "Don't shoot, I live here," I cried out. The police officers had a good laugh when they realized they had been called to arrest the superfan for trying to break out, not into his own house so that he could find a TV to finish watching the rest of that game. That was the second time I've had a run-in with the police in Toronto, and of course, both times were because of my superfan mania. Arvinder couldn't stop laughing at me, and honestly, that's why I love her.
So Nav has his run-ins with the law, he has his business, he has his family, he has the Raptors. That's a lot to fit in to 70,000 words or so. It wouldn't make a ton of sense or be super interesting to do it chronologically. So how did you figure out how you wanted to order the stories as you put them in the book?
So the Raptors started playing in Toronto in 1995 when Nav was around 40 years old. And as I mentioned, he's 72 now. So as you say, writing it chronologically wouldn't have made a lot of sense because we were very aware as we were writing the book that half of the people who were reading this were probably reading it because they were basketball fans. And half of the people who were reading it would probably be like, hey, that brown guy, he looks like me. I want to know what his story is. You know, like people who are new to this country or have lived in this country and want to know who that person is, who that guy is. So the challenge was, how to make sure that both audiences were being served at the same time. And I knew from speaking to Nav that it was really important to him that we specifically highlight the championship run. So I knew I had those as sort of signposts that we had to hit. Like one chapter had to be about, the Orlando team, the Bucks, the Flyers, wow, hockey. 76ers, wow, I don't know where that came from. I'm
impressed that you knew that.
Thank you. And then, of course, the Golden State Warriors. So I knew I had those 4 chapters laid out for sure. And then as I was talking to Nav, I realized that there were certain moments in his life that were mirroring, what was happening on the court was somehow a way reflected in how he saw his life off court. Not that he was ever on the court as a player, but you know what I mean, like sitting courtside. And so that gave me the idea that what if we integrated the chapters back and forth between something that was happening in his personal life and something that was happening on the court, and kind of use them as like ways of mirroring without like saying it explicitly that this is the thing that you need to pay attention to. Let the reader just sort of read it. And if you see the connections between the 2 chapters, great. And if not, we've kept you entertained because at least the story is moving along quickly.
And you talk about signposts, you also use kind of major moments in India's history as signposts as well. Independence, partition, the attack on the Golden Temple. What was it like incorporating that and finding the connection through Nav to these historical events?
It was actually really easy because the reason that he moved from what is now Pakistan to India was because of partition. Like his family moved because of that. So it was like a very easy, important moment to write about that. 1984, the attack on the Golden Temple in Amritsar, and then the subsequent attack on Sikhs living in the capital of Delhi was the impetus for him to move to Canada as well. So these historical events very naturally tied into the story. And for me, the reason that I wanted to write about them was, again, to Nav's point, it's an opportunity to help people understand some of the important Indian history of the reasons why people have come here and the experiences that they've had, and maybe see parallels in the way their own families have immigrated or settled in Canada. So that was part of it. And in writing it, I actually realized how much of my own story I was sharing because it's sheer coincidence. We didn't know this when we had started the project, but the town that Nav's family comes from is the exact town that my family comes from in Sialkot, in what is now Pakistan. And then where he moved to Delhi and lived in Hauzkhas is where my family still lives, in that neighborhood. And when he moved to Canada, it was in Mississauga, and we lived like maybe 10 minutes apart. So my family also moved to Mississauga, and then just the number of coincidences between his life and my life were so fascinating. Another one that I can share is that when he talked about feeling stressed about his family that was back in India while the riots were going on in 1984, he couldn't get through to his family in Delhi and find out what was going on with them. Interestingly, my dad was in the United States at the same time doing his education, and he was unable to reach his family and find out if they were okay. So some of those moments, the stress that Nav was talking about, because 1984 is so traumatic for him to talk about, I actually, leaned on family members to ask them what those experiences were like and use them to layer the book in.
And so you have these powerful moments, this kind of like parallel story. How did that allow the relationship to flourish? Because it does seem like, this might naturally happen, but it does seem like you've developed quite a special relationship with him.
I think we have, yes. And I think it's because we both, despite the fact that, we have very different interests, I think despite that, we realized actually that we approach the world in a very sort of similar way. We sort of take people at face value. If you say something to me, I will pretty much believe you. I say what's on my mind, he says what's on his mind. What I'm learning from him is, of course, to think of the long game and not immediately like what's in front of me. But we see the world in the same way in terms of we're just straight shooters, both of us. And so I think that makes it easy for us to work together.
And now, I understand it's very clear you're very confident and know who you are, but writing a book can be kind of a transformative experience. Was there anything that you learned about yourself through this process? Just make something up if you have to.
I learned that I can write something in 70,000 words, which was a surprise to me. I think what I learned, maybe what's easier to say is what I learned through Nav. I think that's an easier thing for me to say, because this was really about Nav, right? More so than it was about my growth or individuality. I think what I learned from him was how to really not just make it about me, to really think about what it is that I want to accomplish rather than how I'm feeling. As I said, to think about what it is that you want to accomplish in life and how to sort of reach for that. I think we have a tendency to focus on what's immediately in front of us. And Nav has really shown me that, sometimes if you want to change somebody's mind, as he says, for him, it's through basketball. He says, if you sit down for someone next 48 minutes during a game, you will find that there's something in common with them. And for me, sometimes I feel like the world is so polarizing. I find it hard to be like, I don't know, I don't have anything in common with people from this political view or whatever. And I found, you know what, if I can actually sit down and talk to them, I might not agree with them, but at least I can understand their point of view. And that's something that I think I've learned through working on this book and through Nav, is just being open-minded and being more open to seeing other people's perspectives.
Thank you for that. Thank you for sharing these stories, and congratulations on an excellent book.
Thank you so much.
All right, so we have a room full of journalists and writers. I can only imagine there must be some questions for the question and answer. Go ahead.
I'm from the UBC Creative Writing Programs. My friend Mark also went to UBC with me. And my name's Mason. I really liked the passage you read that showed the layered reasons why Nav was so attached to basketball. It seemed to be about acceptance also, social acceptance, belonging somewhere. I'm wondering if you kind of helped him to see that layer in the literary sense, or if he just had that there already.
That was there with him already. I don't think he needed, because he's been doing this way longer than I have even been aware of that basketball as a game existed, let's be very clear. So he very much knew that. And I don't think Nav would be upset if I said this, but he kind of gave me creative freedom to do whatever I wanted in the book. He just shared his stories and he said, do what you want with them. If you see a connection, you do that. So that wasn't one that I had to do, but there are many other connections in the book that, especially in the parallel structure of the book, those connections between his personal life and his professional life, those are coming from me rather than from him. And when I read them back to him, he was like, yeah, I agree with you. Because I hadn't thought of it that way. So it's a little bit of him, a little bit me.
I thought it was woven very skillfully to see why the monumental importance of basketball to him became so clear in a layered way.
Thank you.
Another question?
Hi. So did he approve every word? Did he go through the manuscript?
No. Nav did not read the manuscript before it was out there. It was his manager, Rinku, who's really his right-hand brain. Like, he is the real brains behind the Superfan, establishment that it is. And so Rinku was the one who read the whole manuscript, and Nav trusts him completely. He's like, if Rinku approves of something, that's okay. So Rinku read it, and then we had certain key sections that were read by his wife Arvinder and his daughter Tia when they were about them. And certain other key people read certain key passages, but Rinku was the only one, aside from the publisher and myself, and my husband Jacob, who read the whole manuscript before it was published. Hey, Nick.
Hi, for Mason. I have a related question, actually. So, as you know, as a journalist, going through an edit is tedious as can be. And you're being trusted with somebody's story, written in their voice. You've got to get it all done, you've got the manager's approval, whatever, then you're going through publisher. What was that experience like, having to kind of defend, fight for, sacrifice things when you're going through that edit, but working in somebody else's voice?
It was so interesting because they almost took out nothing that I wrote. They took out just maybe half a chapter that, I can't explain what that chapter is because obviously they didn't want it in there. But for the most part, they genuinely, like, Nav and Rinku just trusted me to get it done right. And so the one chapter that as I mentioned, the half chapter that they took out, I said, what was wrong with it? Like, did I get something wrong, inaccurate? Like, did I not capture your voice or your sentiment? And he was like, oh no, I just kind of forgot that we were actually doing this for a book and I wasn't just chatting with you as part of our weekly chats. Like, he kind of just forgot that we were here to do a job and not just be friends. So I think he maybe revealed a bit too much there. So we took that one out happily. And the rest of it with the publisher, it was actually more trying to convince him to put that back. And so I think for me, with negotiating with the publisher in terms of what language we would have or not have, for the most part, again, they just really trusted me to know what Nav would want, and to put that in there. And the only kind of real discussions that we would have would be like around specific language. Like, for example, in one part of the book, they wanted to use the word unhoused to describe slums in India. And I had to be like, no. Slums are not, like, people who live in slums in India are not unhoused. It's a very specific type of housing situation that's in that country. And so there was more like cultural nuance and context. And so beyond that, the editing process was, I would say, as smooth as it could have been. Don't want to toot my horn, but they actually took out one of the rounds of editing because of how well it went.
La-ti-da. One of our lovely editors right there is going, yeah, right. Any other questions? Sorry.
So, Tamara, you described how you got into Nav's voice and then bringing sounded like your grandparents. What we haven't talked about is what is it like as a young woman writing in the voice of an elderly man? And I guess sort of one of the little things I'm thinking about is that there is some chatter in the literary world these days that men can't write women characters and women can't write men characters. So was there any, do you think it would have been different if he'd been a man? Would you have written a slightly different story? Or did your being a woman bring extra depth and help bring out this true story in addition to his voice?
I've never really stopped to consider that because there was just the timeline that we had to get it done in. What I would say is that Nav's favorite people are all women, like genuinely. His wife, his daughter, and his mother is such a huge, important influence in him as well. These three women, I think, have really shaped him into the person that he is. So there are people of his generation. I've been very fortunate that my grandparents haven't been this way. My family isn't this way. But I would say that for a lot of Indian women, you don't always expect that people of that generation would necessarily treat you fairly. And he gets it. And he treated me with the utmost sincerity. And so it was very easy for me to relate to him because I didn't have, like, it was literally like talking to my grandparents or my parents who understood what it's like to me and wanted me to flourish. Initially, when we had signed the deal, there was no guarantee that my name would be on the book because that's generally how ghostwriting or co-writing relationships work. And when I handed in the manuscript and they looked at it, they went, no. Your name needs to be on it. You understand him. And so that was just like a sign of how they treat women, how they respect them, how they genuinely want to uplift them. And when I say them, I mean both Rinku and Nav, because they're very much a team together. And so for me, it was, it never even came up as a question because I could see how genuine they were in wanting me to feel safe, included, respected, and a part of the process. So it'd be very hard to say what the book would be like if a man wrote it, for example.
I think we have time for one more question if anyone has one. Oh, here they come. CB?
Well, you've gone through the process now. You know you can write 70,000 words. Hardly anyone ever writes just one book. So what's the next one?
Oh, God. What I've learned through the process is that I need to take a break. I've actually made a promise to myself that I'm only going to work full-time at CBC. I'm not going to teach at UBC. I'm not going to do an MFA program, and I'm not going to try and write a book at the same time, at least for another 6 months. We'll see how long that lasts. But I don't know. I don't know what my next book is going to be, but I do definitely want to write something. I think what I feel like writing right now is what it is to be somebody who is a third culture individual, somebody like one more layer than what Nav talked about, because I grew up in the Middle East. And so I want to write about what it's like to be somebody who's neither at home in the country that you were born in, nor fully, accepted as Canadian by others. And you have yet another third country that you call home. So that's an idea that's percolating in the back of my mind, but I am nowhere ready to start typing. I need a bit of a break before I get there.
I know there were a couple more. We can get one more in here.
I have a question. With this whole process, are there any regrets or things that you wish went different, or maybe there's something that you didn't explore about now, or I know that there's that little bit that was taken out. Maybe there's some parts that you wish could have fit into the book, but maybe it didn't make sense in terms of looking at it.
I wish that we could have actually included the chapter that we had, because I think it showed a layer of Nav as a father that I think was really important. We didn't get into this enough because he's so worried about his daughter, but she very openly lives with bipolar disorder, and I think it would have been really interesting to dive in a bit more into that. Because it's something that's not talked about enough within the South Asian community about what it's like to live with mental health issues. And so I think that would have been something that I would have very much liked to have had in the book as a richer, deeper layer. But he was protective of his daughter, and he didn't want to get into it. He already sees how much she's bullied online for expressing as much as she does. And so I just think that would have been very interesting to explore that. But other than that, no, it was honestly like my only regret is that maybe I didn't take the time to just savor what it's like to write this. I was just working so much that I don't think I enjoyed it as much as I could have. And now I'm finally getting to enjoy it in moments like this.
Thank you for the thoughtful questions. Thank you for coming out to the event tonight. My name is Jeremy Allingham. Once again, Tamara Baluja, the co-author of the book, The Heart of a Superfan, a memoir of grit, love, family, and basketball. Thanks for coming out.
And thank you, Jeremy.